So a protest in Toronto has turned violent. You might be thinking, is it the Hong Kong one? No, the Hong Kong protest has been covered every day on the Canadian news, and for the most part, the coverage has been okay. There's just two major omissions. They haven't shown the pro-American faction to the Hong Kong protest, because that might show that people actually see America in a positive light, and they got to portray the image of America evil and bad. And they have not said the magic word. Do you know what the magic word is? What type of government is China's? What type of government? Communist! Yes, you have never heard the phrase communist government or communism being said. But other than that, it's been good. And there's even been protests in Toronto, and there's been counter-protests on that. And that's been covered to the nth degree, every single day. Right? These protests have received exponentially more coverage than SNC-Lavalin, even though they don't really deal with Canada, or quasi-somewhat need to do with Canada. But a story that is not being talked about is these Kashmiri protests. So, earlier this week, there were protests outside the Indian embassy where Sikh Khalistanis started waving Pakistani flags. And of course, the Palestinian movement showed up, and then the Pakistanis showed up. And the Khalistanis were saying things like Allahu Akbar and this and jihad on India. And all these anti-Indian protests are ultimately funded by the Pakistani government. And they're funded by the Pakistanis because who benefits from discord in India? It's their enemy, Pakistan. So there's no coverage of that. No coverage of that, because then we might have to deal with some uncovered issues like, why are the Khalistanis waving Pakistani flags and talking about jihad against Hindus? Is that because they might be paid by the Pakistani government? And maybe the Khalistani movement, which committed the worst terrorist attack in Canadian history, the Air India bombing, isn't a good movement. Maybe they're the bad guys. Maybe the people blowing up airplanes aren't our friends. Let's ask Raj Gurwal. Raj Gurwal is an interesting fellow. He's a Liberal MP. Now, you might remember him, Raj Gurwal. Yes, he was the MP that was about to resign because he had hundreds of thousands of dollars in gambling debt. And then he decided not to resign because his debt disappeared. Like that. Poof, went away. Where did it go? Let's ask Raj Gurwal's uncle, who you can find on video in the 1980s holding an AK-47 in Pakistan, shooting it off, talking about committing committing terrorist attacks. What's the difference? Against India. Very interesting fellow, the Gurwals. How are they so connected in Canadian politics? So we have problems with extremism in Canadian politics. Yes, we do. If you don't believe me, ask Raj Gurwal, ask Ukra Khalid, ask some questions to Omar Al-Ghabra, look at Khalid Rashid. All these wonderful figures. I have to talk about. But here's something that did get covered. And this got covered in CTV News. We don't have time to show you that whole video. But this was covered in CTV News as a fight breaking out between two sides. As the classic sort of, two people, they disagree here. Now I'm going to show you the part of the video. You can look at the CTV coverage of the Kashmir protests. Then I'm going to show you the parts of the video that they would have seen but purposely edited out. So the man in white is the lone India supporter in this video, and he's surrounded by all the Pakistanis. So here's the man in white. He's there beside the police. He is just saying pro-India stuff, and okay, there he's pushed once assault. He's pushed once, and now he's punched. So he's been assaulted physically. All right. So here we have, this is what the media calls a fight. Now this is a Pakistani blogger. We don't know what he's saying because it's not in English. So he's saying squiggly line, squiggly line, squiggly line, squiggly line, squiggly line, jihad, jihad. Something, something, squiggly line, squiggly line. Now we go back, and we see again. So we see the guy from India. And he's standing there, he's yelling back, he's making his point, and then a man coming up from behind him, and he's spitting on him. Spit on him again. Spit on him 3 times. Spit on him a 4th time. And see that the man from India has not assaulted anyone. He's not touched anyone. And here are the police. Oh, and who are they? What are they doing? Oh, they're pushing him back, right? So, again, there's only one man who was assaulted or pushed around during this entire protest, and that was the lone India supporter. He was pushed around and punched by a Pakistani supporter or Kashmiri right in front of the police. We saw a punch there. Nothing happened to that guy. Right? Pushed the 2nd time, and then pushed the 3rd time to the police, and then spat on by another Kashmiri or Pakistani supporter. So there were 4 potential assaults, right? Again, and we're not going to talk about police brutality now. And that's not police brutality. But 3 assaults on this guy. He assaults no one on video. And it's a fight. A fight broke out. A fight broke out, right? A fight. It's violence on both sides. Cycle of violence. You know, See, it's just like, the Palestinian issue. It's a cycle of violence. A Palestinian puts on a suicide belt, walks into a supermarket, blows himself up. One Palestinian dead, a bunch of kids dead. Cycle of violence. See, they were fighting each other, right? They both got hit by the same explosion, right? But two people died. Oh, it's a wash. So this is what I said before. The media came into this having a narrative. And the media is not pro-Pakistan. It's not pro-Kashmir. It's not pro-Palestinian. It's not even pro-Muslim. It's not pro-trans. It's pro the narrative. And right now the Pakistani stuff fits the narrative. And the second the Pakistanis support, and the second pushing Pakistani propaganda doesn't support the narrative because the intersectional left changes on a whim, then screw Pakistan because they're dead to us. And that will be the media's MO here. And during the coverage, they said the things like, all right, a fight broke out. And then when they covered it, they only covered the Pakistani, again, they gave the Pakistani propaganda side. They said, oh yes, there was a lockdown in Kashmir, and they let the Kashmiri people say, oh, there's violence against the family, and the Indian army is committing a genocide! A genocide! And this is the exact same genocide that's happening in the Palestinian territories. Now, for record here, the population is increasing in both these areas. Population is increasing, which means India and Israel are terrible at genocides. If you're going to commit a genocide, the goal of genocide is usually to reduce a specific population. When the population increases, I generally fall on the side of that's not a genocide. And it's the same type of genocide. What is a genocide? Well, it's radical Islamists aren't allowed to murder Jews and Hindus. And because they're not allowed to murder rampantly, that's considered genocide against them. And again, they didn't cover the Indian side. If you want to say stuff like, oh, Modi is evil and Indian army is doing this in Kashmir, then you have to say Article 370 repeals laws that make it legal to rape kids. It's no longer legal to rape kids. Also, women in Kashmir, if they marry a non-Kashmiri person, they immediately lose citizenship in all their land. That law has been taken away. Also, all the Pakistani jihadist groups. Again, we talked about the fact that there was just a suicide bombing in Kashmir, which was basically through an ISI terrorist-funded group, Jayat al-Josh, which is another problem there, right? There's rampant Pakistani-backed terrorist groups who trained at the same place, connected to the ISNA in Canada. Well, the ISNA is also an American thing, so that's more a North American problem. Right? None of that gets mentioned. Not a single word from the Indian point of view. So this is the bullshit. It's like, oh, there's a cycle of violence, there's two different claims. What is Pakistan's claim to Kashmir? Pakistan's claim to Kashmir is an Islamist claim. They say there are Muslims in Kashmir, which is legally Indian territory, but because there are Muslims there, if Muslims there aren't run under Sharia law, it is oppressing the Muslims here in Pakistan, and therefore it is Pakistan. That's a ridiculous claim, and it's a nonsense claim. And also, Kashmir is a mountainous region. It is a military significance, and there's tons of jihadis there. You can't just give jihadis the mountains, because they're going to use them to kill your people. Now, you can't let them kill your people, because killing people is bad. So again, to recap, India is committing a genocide in Kashmir. This genocide is consisting of increasing populations and not letting the Muslims kill the Kashmiri Pandits. So, no mention of the real genocide done against the Kashmiri Pandits, most recent one in the 90s. Instead, we're talking about a fake genocide, which is a genocide where they're not allowing people to commit a genocide. Got it? Okay. The media, 101. And we wonder why people don't trust the media. So welcome India and people to the global support group for people against globalist nonsense. You have North American conservatives, Israel, and now India in what the hell is the media doing? These liars need to be stopped. So welcome India to our little coalition of screw the UN.